What is up, y'all? Welcome back to another episode of The Black Experience, y'all. I hope everyone is doing well. Whatever time zone you may be listening, watching this, I appreciate your support. For all my new viewers, welcome to the journey. Welcome to The Black Experience. And to all my old viewers and listeners, thank you so much. I have a treat for you guys today. Today, y'all, I have somebody who's in the podcasting world like me. Today, I have someone who is a podcast development strategist, in fact, who's got plenty of experience. He's a community builder, he's the co founder of Press Record Studio, and he's also the founder of Black Podcasters Association, an association that I am a part of. So let's put our hands together and let's bring up Mr. Corey Gumbs. What's
Hey man,
going
thank
on?
you. Appreciate you inviting me and asking to be on your show, man. I love coming out and representing and talking with our members on their podcast. So thank you. I appreciate it. It's an honor to be here.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. It's an honor to have your time. I know you're a busy man. I know you've got a lot of people to connect with and a lot of stuff. Just based on the intro, I'm sure people already got that.
Yeah, that's the running joke is that I never sleep and I'm always got my hands in something. I'm probably doing too much actually, but I think the job's got to get done.
Job's got to get done, certainly, Corey. But yeah, Corey. So if you want to kick it off a little bit, talking about just give the audience a little short intro about you, your background, a little bit, where you're from, where you reside right now, and all that good stuff.
This is as long as I've been doing this is one of the hardest parts is talking about myself. I've always wanted to be behind the scenes, so this is a new space for me. But well, my name's Corey Gumbs. I'm from Queens, New York, born and raised. Been living out here basically all my life. Grew up in the 70s, 80s, 90s. I'm aging myself now, but father one three wonderful children. My background, as you probably could tell from my background, music is my thing, and that's actually how I got into podcasting. Was in music in the early 2000s. I stumbled onto podcasting. What was the early rendition of podcasting when I was trying to build a music business website called don'tgetjerk.com. And this was during the whole Napster thing. So that was my first intro into it. But audio has always been a love of mine. Come from a musical family, so and a teaching family, so it kind of all intermixed into the community. But I've been in the industry for 5 years. Started right before the pandemic, where I started with my mobile podcast studio in 2019. And as we know, what happened in 2020, that whole model got blown up.
Mhm.
But where one door closes, another one opens. And not to be so cliche, but at that moment, that's exactly what happened. So we closed down. I kind of closed down the mobile studio because of COVID, but the community started at the same time. So and that's what I've been working on for the past 5 years. Officially, as the BPA 3 years. This year was our third year anniversary. So, but audio's been my thing. I went to school for it. Was a rapper, do beats, music, all that stuff. So I've always been engaged in audio, and it's one of my first loves. But uh, this has been a great journey in learning. Bringing what I've learned over the years. I'm also a web programmer, so like all these different things that I've done in life have actually found its place here in this space and what I'm doing with the community and in podcasting.
Wow. Wow. First of all, I do want to say it's been an absolute joy for me to be a part of Black Podcasters Association. Michael and Tatiana Parker, Watch for the Hook. I actually did a virtual podcast with them. I'm sure some of my viewers know. I would have been able to connect with them. These are people, a couple that lives all the way in Arkansas, and so your platform has been a blessing to me. It's been good to me. So, seriously.
I really appreciate that, and it means a lot because there's times where this is challenging, and I wake up and I'm like, why am I doing this to myself? And it's always when I hear from both members and people in the industry that say, the importance of what this community is for them and what it's done for them. That's kind of the energy, the battery on my back that keeps me going. I really do appreciate that. And I'm hoping you can bring some other members onto your podcast and from the community as well.
Oh yeah,
We're
certainly.
very I think that was the one thing, and I know this is going from tangent real quick, but I think that was the one thing I had an idea of, but I didn't realize the ripple effect of like the relationships and the support that would be, and the friendships and the connections and the business relationships that would be formed simply by me having this crazy idea to create this community. So And some of the people in my community have become really great friends and and mentors and place people I can confide in when I'm going through things. And it's just that's I think that's why the community is such a wonderful place for people because we've created that culture of like
Hmm.
friendship and family in it. So that
Certainly.
really means a lot to me, Rob. Thank you.
For sure, man. For sure. It's been amazing. Um, so you talked about let's kind of dive a little bit to start with the podcasting world and the podcasting ecosystem, you know. We've seen podcasts in recent years, especially since post-COVID, it grow, you know. So many people want to do a podcast. So many people are doing a podcast, including myself. Um, what are some of the, through your experience, what have been some of the mistakes that you've seen, or maybe something that current podcasters are doing that in amidst them trying to build that niche, that ecosystem of a base and audience? This is kind of even for me. What are some of those mistakes, and how can people kind of, you know, help eliminate those mistakes?
The podcasting space is in it's constantly evolving. It's still in its infancy, despite the fact that I think it's 20 years or something, or about to be 20 years old technically. Uh,
Hmm.
that's up for debate, but whatever. For the sake of conversation, I'll just say it's about 20 years old. Um, and it's still a young industry, and it's still trying to sort itself out. It's very independent driven, despite what people may think. It's over 4 million podcasts. And then, there's very little top 1%, 10% podcasts, which is typically those corporate run, celebrity based, or those podcasts that have been here from like the beginning that just over the years have just grown a large audience.
Hmm.
And now the definition of podcast is being defined with video. So it's hard to tell people what the mistake is. I think the biggest mistake now somebody can make is just thinking that you just get in front of a microphone and press record. Technically, ideally, that's what you can do. But if you're planning on building an audience, growing and turning this into something viable outside of just being a hobby where you just express your thoughts and whoever listens, which is fine. There's people who do that, and that I'm not. You got to meet people where they're at. But if you want to take this seriously and make this a thing that's going to be either for building your brand to some, lead generation for your business, whatever your reason, and that's we're going to get into that part. The biggest thing is you need to understand that you have to not press record and actually realize you're building a product for people to consume. I think that's the biggest mistake. Excuse me, any podcaster is making. They're not understanding that this is a product, just like a TV show, just like a movie, just like music. This is an entertainment. This is an entertainment space. So I think that would be the biggest mistake is like, not planning out your podcast, not understanding what you're doing. The other mistake is for me personally, and it's part of I'm actually writing a course right now on this. But understanding why you're doing this, what is the purpose of what you're doing? Is there
Hmm.
a need for you to do this? I've taken my experience in trying, learning to build apps in the programming world and realized that there's a lot of correlation between building a product or podcast and building an app. And one of the first questions when you're doing your market research, you should be asking yourself, is there a need for what I'm about to do? And a lot of people might not agree with me on this, but I will say that there may not be a need if you're just trying to copy and paste what everybody else is doing.
Hmm.
There is a need for your unique perspective and your unique approach to it, but you got to figure that out. And in order to understand that, you have to sit down and really think things through and understand what your motivations, why you're doing it. So um, that to me, and then also realizing that this is a long game. It's not a short game. Don't there's a lot of grifters out here. There's a lot of people out here selling you courses and conferences and doing all these things, telling you they can get you from point A to point B in X amount of time. And one thing I've learned is that those real serious podcasts that people really love and enjoy, a
Hmm.
lot of times they're in production for a year or two before they even launch. They have teams, they're doing research, they're writing scripts, they're doing production, they're bringing in, they're bringing all these different components in to create this very refined product for you to consume and to enjoy. And those take time. And a lot of people just think, oh, they see what somebody's doing on YouTube or hearing and like, oh, I can do that, not realizing that this is a skill set that you have to develop over years. And a good friend of mine, she used to always say, your first season is where you make all your mistakes. The second season is when you find your voice. So um, people need to understand this is a long game. There's a commitment. There's a level of commitment that has to be created, and that's something I talk about in my course too. Is like bringing on board your family, friends, and getting them to understand. Like any business, like any entrepreneurship endeavor, there's a it's not just about you. It's about the people around you and the effect of what you're about to do is going to have on them. And it's not always a positive experience, and people won't understand your vision. So
Mhm.
that's for me. That's where I'm at now with it, and I think a lot of people need to start being more honest and truthful about their experience in podcasting and the experiences that they went through to get people to understand how serious this is, how serious of it is. And yes, there are people who successfully just started recording, but one of the biggest questions I always get is how do I grow my audience? How do I make money? Well, you don't if you don't know who your audience is, how are you going to grow them? So I guess that's the other mistake, not knowing who your audience is. But a lot of that is encompassed in the previous things that I said. So once you figure out what you want to do, how you want to do it,
Mhm.
and what your purpose is, then you can start understanding who you want to talk to.
Yeah, certainly. And that's something, again, me, not considering this podcast thing, I never really took it seriously because it wasn't supposed to be a year, 2 year long podcast. It wasn't until a few years, kind of like what your friend said, season one, you're making all the mistakes until you find your voice and that seriousness starts to come in. And that's been my experience so far.
Yeah.
And it's definitely harder than it seems. Again, for me personally too, sometimes I gotta really push myself and say, you know what, I may have the questions ready to go. Let's say for you, I may feel ready, but having one or two extra reps of practice, saying that intro, getting ready for transitions, whatever it is, never hurts. And that kind of can make you stand apart.
I mean, this is a skill. It's a skill set, and you don't. I always joke around with Allen Iverson. Practice, practice, but
Yeah. Yeah.
there in a lot of spaces, practice does make perfect. Even some of the most seasoned actors still have to go through their acting exercises before they go on stage or before they do, film. The musicians still practice. They still, as they get older, it's called jam sessions, but it's still practice. It's still you engage in your craft and trying to figure out how do I make myself better. So I think, and because it's such an easy barrier of entry to get into podcasting versus some of these other entertainment fields right now, where you can just put up your phone and get a microphone, or sometimes you don't even need a microphone. No shade at you, but you might want to invest in one. But I'm big on that stuff
No,
too.
certainly, for
But
sure.
long story short, it's such a because of technology, it's such a quick entry point
Mhm.
into podcasting that people just jump in it and they don't know how to swim, and then they wind up drowning, and then the average podcast only goes 7 to 10 episodes. And there's 4 million
Wow.
podcasts. Only 15% about don't quote me, this is not an exact number, but about 15% of that 4 million is actually active podcasts, meaning within the past 30 days to 6 months, a new episode was published. So there's a serious issue in the podcasting industry, especially from the independent point of view, where people are jumping into
Mhm.
this, not knowing what they're getting themselves into and realizing, oh, I wasn't prepared for this. It's overwhelming. It's a lot. A lot of independent podcasters wear many hats. They're producers, they're the talent, they're the editor, they're the engineer. They're doing all these different things while also managing their personal lives. So it becomes a very overwhelming task. And if you're not prepared for it, or if you don't prepare for yourself for it, and you don't practice, and you don't get yourself to a point where you're like, this is where I want to be at, right? Like, I finally figured out how I want to do my intro. I finally figured out how I want to conduct my interviews and stuff. And if they're not constantly, and you got to constantly be learning. That's another mistake a lot of podcasters make. Don't make. They're not constantly trying to improve themselves and learn. They're just trying to get the money. Um,
Yeah.
so
And that only
um,
goes so far, right? When money's the motivation from the
the
start.
money's one for me, the money's the byproduct. Like
Yeah.
with anything you do, if you put out good music and you have a good strategy on getting it out there to people, if you make a good movie, you know, the money's the byproduct of it. Now, some people might disagree and be like, well, there's plenty of great music, there's plenty of great art where people didn't realize what the art was. Van Gogh is one of those. Like my friend, she always talks about Van Gogh, how he was poor when he was making his art, and it wasn't until he died that he became popular. But yeah, we can do that conversation too. But at the end of the day, but he did everything he possibly did to perfect his art because that's what he loved to do.
Hmm.
I feel the same way in this space. You have to prepare yourself. You have to train yourself There's a way to handle conversations. There's a way to tell stories. There's a way to interact with people to get to try to get as much great content out of them. So, but that takes practice and it takes confidence and it takes charisma and it's a whole multifaceted space that you have to learn different skill sets in. Some of it comes naturally, some of it doesn't. People hear me talk like this, they don't realize that I never wanted to do interviews when I first started this. I was, and I look at some of my old stuff and I'm like, I'm like, oh, you need media training, bro. Like, I still need media training, right? And that's something we're trying to do in our community. But at the end of the day, you need practice. You need to be prepared for what you're about to do, no matter what it is you're trying to do.
Certainly. Man, Corey, I can learn so much from you, man. I already am right now on this episode. So um kind of go so let's kind of dive a little bit into Black Podcast Association, as well as your newsletter, Black Pod News, that you got going on right now. What was kind of the initial inspiration behind that to start that, to jumpstart that? Were there any industry gaps that you saw at the time? Kind of take us through your mindset at the time.
Look, bro, us just being black or whatever it is you identify, BIPOC, whatever it is, there's always going to be a gap no matter what industry you're in, right? Um, for me, it came down, it came from a point of frustration. Like I said, I started my mobile podcasting studio. Like many people, I got into podcasting. So I was in podcasting in the early 2000s. Life happened, forgot about it, moved on. 2013, my boy sends me a podcast, and I'm like, people are still doing this? Like, this is like 10 years later when I was in it, which is why I say it's debatable about when podcasting started, because I remember this was before my son was born when I was doing that project. So my son's gonna be
Mhm.
26. So that's how old, that's how old I remember podcasting. But long story short, with that, I started like a lot of people. Me and my friend was supposed to start a podcast. We wanted to talk black issues with politics, science, in the tech space because that's where we were at. We had a lot of conversations about that. Like many people, hey, you should start a podcast, right? And I was at the time I was in school I went back to school to brushing up my skills on programming, and I was driving Uber, and I was just living life like everybody else. And then when I had a car accident in 2018, and after me and my friend of years trying to get this podcast off the ground and having investors and deals falling through and stuff, when I had my car accident, I was like, now I got time to really learn this podcasting stuff. So I did like most people do. I went to YouTube University during the time of my healing. I was just learning stuff. Shout out to Shannon Hernandez. He's a radio personality out in Arizona because I was watching his video, and that's how I started the mobile studio. And he had a setup, and me being an audio person, I was like, I know that stuff. I know what he's doing. And I reached out to him,
Yeah.
and he gave me his time, and he told me what he was doing. And I took my last 2 grand out of my savings and started the studio part. And throughout 2019, I was learning how to record mobile and had a couple clients. And during that time period, I was in like a lot of people. I was in these Facebook groups and different communities, and I was just in like the attitude of, for the sake of the conversation, podcasting is a very white male dominated space.
Mm.
Still is. It's growing globally, but it's still a very bro centered space. And the conversations was showing me at first. I was like, oh, it's racism, but it's not always racism. Sometimes it's just a cultural disconnect. Sometimes it's just a
Mhm.
miscommunication. But the thing that was really irking me was like seeing people like, oh, just go get this microphone, da 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 da. And I'm like, you're talking to people who don't know nothing about audio and telling them to go buy a $800 mic and telling them to buy a $600 software program. You tell them to get a $1,200 computer, and I'm like, bro, like you're being. It's almost like you're not. You're almost being insensitive to these people,
Mm.
almost being a diminishing of what they want to do by saying do these things, not understanding when people say I can't afford that. And I'm like, well, you can start with a $50 mic. It may
Yeah.
not be the best audio, but there's a way to make it better, right?
Mhm.
And I was complaining to a friend, and she was like, well, start your own. And like Jordan, I took it personal because I'm very competitive. And I was like, okay. And she sat down with me. We set up the Facebook group.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what I wanted to call it. It was called the Black Podcasting Group. I just had it as a placeholder. But then COVID happened. I literally started the group in March in 2020. I had on my calendar to launch my mobile podcast business officially in March 2020. COVID hit New York City in March 2020.
Hmm.
So everything just got all convoluted, but the community blew up. And then from there, it was just me trying to figure out like, I knew I wanted to monetize it. I just didn't know. I didn't know what I was doing. And from my experience in the music industry, I was like, we didn't have a trade organization. We didn't have like a organization for black podcasters in general, but for black podcasters. And I was like, I took the ASCAP model, which is, if you don't know, it's like a they deal with publishing for artists in the music industry, but they also do a lot of artist development stuff.
Mm,
So like teach you how to be a better producer, how to be a better songwriter, and this that was benefits of your membership to them. And I was like, I took that model and was just trying to figure out how to make it work in the podcast space. So really I was trying to fill that gap. And at the time too, with COVID, a lot of black people were jumping into podcasts. We traditionally were anywhere between 13 to 16% of listenership. And now all these people want to get, people finding things to do in their home, and podcasting just blew up and it's taking off and everybody's jumping in. And I was just looking at the standard of quality of content. I was like, we got to raise the bar a little bit. If
hmm
you really want to reach these audiences you want to reach, you got to, you're not saying you got to have a well produced, like a crazy background, like we see some people doing and stuff, but you at least have a polished product where you put out good audio, or you have good content, or you have a good understanding of podcasting. So I created this space where we could be ourselves. You didn't have to code switch. You can ask the questions you want to ask. Um, and that was that's where I wanted, that was the gap I was trying to fill, because people were code switching. And some people I met, I know it's a long answer, bro. Just bear with me. But there was producers, some people who hired producers, white producers, and they were trying to get them to code switch. And they're like, I don't want to do that. And I saw, I was like, there's a need for what we're doing here. And that was the gap. No knock on, our white counterparts, but
Sure.
if they don't understand, they don't understand.
Right.
I say I want to be able to talk how I talk at home on a podcast. I don't want to be all radio voicey all the time. Right. So that was that part. The newsletter, Black Pod News, was a more simple answer. Was we don't have, when you look at some of the very popular podcast newsletters, it's not very black centered, BIPOC centered,
Mm,
people of color centered. And a couple people I know were like trying to get some things published in some newsletters, and it was kind of like we're not in alignment. And I'm like, my attitude has always been, well, I don't want to, and that was another reason why I started a community. I don't want to sit at the table and beg for scraps. We'll just make our own table.
mm,
Started the Black Pod News was like, you know what? We just need our own space. And I tell people all the time, like it annoys me to a point now. It's like I'm begging people to send me content, and I'm telling you, this is for us, by us, and I want to highlight, and discoverability too was like an issue with discoverability with Black podcasts. I wanted to create this newsletter where we put our content to the forefront. We highlight Black podcasters. We talk about relevant news in the industry that most Black people they don't even know about a lot of these newsletters. So when I see an article, I'm like, yo, you need to know about, like, what's going on at Spotify or Apple or with YouTube, or hey, let's highlight more of the Black creators behind the space that don't get the shine, like the producers, the writers, and stuff like that. So I try to create this trade. What I want it to be is a trade paper for the black portion of podcasting.
hmm
So that's spawned from.
mm. I love it how you said, I want our people the way they talk. Like I want that. I want their own platform for that. Because I think podcasting can be radio like, right? Where it's,
Well, it's becoming that because radio and music, are moving into podcasting.
right, right. And with that comes that like that certain, way you gotta be, that certain professionalism. And professionalism is not bad, but I think what makes your product unique is the fact that people talk the way they talk, and specifically, for Black creatives out there. And, obviously it's a cultural difference, right? Every culture has their own difference. So people that look like us, even people that don't look like us, that want to see how, people from our culture talk, react, see
Yeah.
things.
I've had some of my white counterparts in the space come to me and say they love the newsletter because it helps them be able to reach their clients, or it gives them a better understanding of their clients and their
Yes.
content, because they don't have, and this is not, that's not racism and it's not ignorance. It's just, if you're not in that space, how do that's part of the problem in America, at least with some of the stuff culturally. Is like, if I grew up in a predominantly Latino or Black neighborhood or white neighborhood, and I never had access to another group of people, yeah, stereotypes are going to run. Yeah, there's going to be ignorance because I've never experienced it. So when you create these tools that help bridge the gap, and that was the thing. Like, first, my idea was isolationism, like everything black, 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 black. But I started learning there's spaces in this industry where we don't have any black people at all. We're starting to get them like in the legal space. We're starting to have black lawyers come in.
Sure.
Some of these upper management positions. We're starting to see more black people being put in those positions. But there's places in this podcasting industry where there's no black people that exist, and that's a problem. But I was like, we can go isolationist, or we can figure out how to turn this community what we're doing into like ambassadors and bridge these gaps. Because
Hmm.
at the end of the day, podcasting wants to survive on a global scale. It needs to understand that there's majority of people of color that are population of the world, not people, we can, but we need to understand. People need to understand it's podcasting. It's not black. It's not white. And
Right.
sometimes I hate the fact that I have to say Black Podcast Association. Sometimes I have to say black content. But at the end of the day, people identify with what they identify with. So for me, it's important now. It's like for us to be a bridge and say, yeah, it's Black Pod News and it's about black content, but it's open to everybody. Just like when we do our events, I always let people know this is open to everybody. I've had people say, I thought it was for only black people. I'm like, no, like this
Mhm.
is a podcast. I want you to come meet these people in my community because
Yes.
they
Right.
have great content. They're great people. They have great ideas. And there's a synergy that can happen if we all come together and understand that it's about podcasting. And that's the culture I've created. Like I don't care what the differences we have. Once you come into the community, it's about podcasting, your religious beliefs, your political beliefs. That's for your show. Here, we're talking podcasting.
100%, 100%. I'll tell you this, Corey. When I was the Black Student Union president at my university, I was there. I was president for 1 year, and I remember all sorts of my friends would come at me and be like, "Hey, man, congratulations, but can we come to BSU? Are we allowed to come into that space? I know it's Black Student Union." I said, "Of course you are. Of course you are. Of course, have some respect, definitely, for the
Yeah,
people there in that space. But I want you guys to come because, again, it's that understanding piece, right? It's understanding, okay, because we talk about certain topics, what Black students specifically have been going through, with a specific professor, a specific teacher, whatever, and understanding that, it gives that understanding of culture, and celebration as well, too, not just the trauma part of things, but also the celebration of Black culture and kind of how we do things is really bridging the gap. And that's what I'm trying to do with my podcast. So right
yeah.
on with that message. I'm right with you.
I tell people ask me, I've had people say, can I join? And I'm like, yeah, you can join. So a couple of things like, yeah, I'm about ambassadorship, but sometimes you got to, I will check you, right? Like, and let you know,
Of
like
course.
one thing I like, one thing people need to understand is I'm not, it's not that I'm not trying to get sponsorship. It's not that I'm trying to work with companies and get the money portion of it, but I don't have that. I don't have a company in my pocket where I have to watch what I say and do what and my support comes from my community first. So
Mm,
I always have to, and these are people who pay membership. These are people who are supporting us. So my responsibility is to the community. And so when people come to me and say, hey, can I be a part of this? Is it open to me? And I'm like, yeah. The only thing is you have to understand, especially if you come into the community and you don't consider yourself black or you're not black, we welcome you. That's cool, but you're gonna have, like you said, you have to respect the conversations. There's gonna be conversations that are gonna happen that you're not gonna like. You're not gonna like the positions
not
that
gonna
come.
be comfortable with it. Yeah.
It's not gonna be a comfortable conversation. You might make you feel awkward, and if you're okay with that, that's fine. If you know how to sit that one out, that's fine. But if you start to cross certain lines, then I will step in and be like, because I have a zero tolerance policy for a lot of things. So it's like, no, this is for us. This is our space. And the fact that I've had people ask me why is there a Black Podcast Association, or why is there a need for one? To me, the fact that you have to even ask that question should tells me that there's a need for it, right? Because if you can't understand why we exist and what we're trying to do, then and because our message is very clear, but the fact that we felt that we have to start something for ourselves to feel safe, speaks volumes. So, I do fight a lot of those battles too.
Of
Um,
course.
but
Yeah.
the goal is, and for me, I had to decide as a community leader is how it's not about me. I have the vision and this is my thing, and then, I'm the founder and I have my thing that I want to do with this and I have goals and direction I want to take it in. But
Mhm.
the question is at the end of the day, it's always for me is how does this benefit my membership? Now we can be isolationists and we can be combative and all that. And how does that help the members? It
Right.
doesn't, right?
Yeah.
How do I bridge these gaps to show these companies that Black content creators have the highest engagement when it comes to advertisers than any other group of people, even though we don't have the numbers, the numbers that they're looking for. but we have the highest. It's statistic. This is a fact. We have the highest engagement when it comes to advertisers. So why are you ignoring Black content creators?
Yeah.
And I have to take on that responsibility as a community leader and say, how do I get these conversations going? How do I bridge these gaps? Um, and unfortunately, sometimes you got to play politics, but that's just doing business. Period.
Hmm.
I don't care what business you're in. There's a politics side of it, so that you have to play. Especially if you're responsible for other people.
Yeah.
So that's
Certainly.
where that's where like the evolution of like my mentality on like comes from. And I always use my community as my grounding, as the grounding for me is how does this benefit? So when people pitch to me, yeah, people are like, oh, we'll make sure you get money off of it. Okay, that's fine. That's like I said, that's the byproduct. I'm gonna
Yeah.
figure out how to get my money off of it. But at the end of the day, how does this benefit my membership? Because I know some people are trying to take advantage too. Whole community of black people. A lot of people don't know that companies use black people, especially in the entertainment space, to get their brand up. Netflix did it.
Mm.
A lot of these companies do it. They did it in music, they do it in movies, they do it in TV, and then when they want to get the real advertising, they shift, right? So I'm trying to figure out how to bridge these gaps and bring more and show people why our content and what we do is so valuable outside of you just trying to build your brand off of it.
Love that. Love that, Corey. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's yeah. This is gonna be, a generational thing, It's not just a overnight thing, but I strongly support you in that and what you're trying to do. So shout out to you. More power to you for that, man. Your hip hop production background. A little bit about that. Tell us a little bit about that, how you got into that, and then also, does that correlate? Is there any correlation? Is there any bridge with the podcasting world and, how those two intersect?
Oh yeah. Um, I'm laughing because I have some I talk people always talk about my when I talk about my history and stuff in hip hop and stuff. I have friends that be like, oh, I'm gonna take a shot for every time you mention this, right? So if you're watching, take a shot now because the speech is coming. But when I was younger, I come from a musical family, so I my mom's side was teachers in music. My father was played. He was a jazz musician out of Puerto Rico. He played on some big names. My grandfather played in the Puerto Rican Philharmonic. My grandmother, on his mom, she trained a lot of Puerto Rican musicians and the conservatory. So it's in my blood. And then growing up in the '80s and '90s, I grew up in the golden age of hip hop. So that was my thing. And I used to want to rap, and I had a group when I was in high school, and we were doing our thing. And we broke up. Uh, I always wanted to make the beats. I wanted to learn, but I also could rap. And I learned that rapping on stage wasn't for me when we did a talent show. And this goes back to training, right? Because we didn't
Yeah.
weren't trained. And I froze, and my boys had to do my verse. And I was like, I don't like this. I don't want to do it. I'd rather my love was being in the studio. That was where I was happy in the studio. So I went to school for that for a little while, but I wasn't ready for it. Failed out, that whole thing. But I was still chasing my dream. And my friend's brother, he taught me how to make beats, and I would just make beats and stuff. I was going down that journey. But then I got an internship at Def Jam in '96. So I was at Def Jam. I remember the day Jay-Z signed with Def Jam. We was in the office that day. I worked the Foxy Brown project. I was on the Muddy Waters project. I was there when
Man.
I was there when one of my favorite groups came back, EPMD, when they reconnected. So I've been on tour. I was on the Smoking Grooves tour. So I was like, I remember when Erica Badu first performed Tyrone live. I was there for that. Like I was there for a lot of these moments in hip hop history. So, but I also learned for me, I wasn't built for the industry, the business side of it, because my personality as a young, angry, black, fatherless, not guided youth was I was on some street, like ready to fight people and drinking. Like it was real self-destructive behavior, but music was always my love.
Mhm.
Um, and then, uh, we signed a bad management deal one time. And that's when I started the website don'tgetjerked.com because I worked in a cyber cafe when those things existed. Uh, and I was watching the Napster thing on the news, and I was like, "This is where the music industry is going. They wouldn't be fighting so hard if this wasn't where it was going."
What is the
And
Napsters, Corey? I know. I'm young, man. I don't know.
you listen to the audio, I'm laughing because the generational gap, and it's not that. I mean, look, You make the assumption sometimes, right? Like, it's no, I'm laughing at myself because I'm like, I'll be forgetting sometimes there's a
I
generational.
know. Yeah, Gen Z, man,
And
we don't know
because of
anything about
technology's
masses.
been make everything much smaller. The world has made the world much smaller. You forget that back in 99, 98, the internet wasn't what it is now.
Right.
Napster was one of those like a LimeWire. It was like where people used to download movies and music all the time. It was an exchange where
Oh,
people,
okay. Okay. So it's like an app.
well, yeah, it was a website
Yeah.
slash apps weren't really a big thing back then until the iPhone came out. So and that was a couple years after Napster. But what happened was a lot of people would illegally download music off of Napster.
Hmm.
So you would basically how it worked was you might have a song on your computer and you put it on Napster and people can download it from your computer, right? File sharing. And the music industry was started to go after them because it was real popular and they were losing a lot of money to bootlegging. And this was because of the iPod and everything. So in the MP3 players, I didn't have to buy music.
Hmm.
I can go on LimeWire, Napster, download the music, and just put it on an MP3 player. I don't ever have to buy it. They're not getting the plays and all that stuff. So the government they filed a copyright. I mean, the RIAA filed a copyright lawsuit and sued Napster and did all that and tried to get them shut down. And that's how we got the Digital Millennium Copyrights Act and a whole lot of things that we have now. Um, but I saw that was the future of the industry, and I was trying to start don'tgetjerked.com. I was 21 years old, and I wanted artists to have pages, and that's why I found podcasting. And in my mind, it was like the independent. The internet is going to be the place for the independent artists to be able to make money and free themselves without having to distribute music through CDs and cassettes at the time. And you can now just create a digital file and people can download it, right? Make one file. You don't have to worry about pressing up, and that means more money because that's what the record labels would use to justify taking your money. Oh, we printed a million records at $2 a piece, plus the marketing, da da da. Now the internet, you didn't have to do that, and I saw it as an opportunity for independent artists to reach audiences now without having and make more money in their own pocket. And I always tell people, Don'tGetJarked.com was eventually supposed to become like what MySpace, Facebook, and Twitter became.
Mm.
I was doing that in
It was
1999,
supposed to be that big. Yeah.
and I had two partners. They didn't have the vision, and I'm 21. I'm making $8 an hour working at this place, and I don't even know how I was funding this guy to pay because back building a website back then was even more expensive. I gave this guy I must have given him like a $10,000 to start
Wow.
the process
And
to
back
build.
then that was a
That's a
lot.
lot of money back then,
Yeah.
especially $8 an hour. I don't know how I was doing it, bro. Um, but I was making it happen, and he was working with me in phases. But long story short, we started that, and I stumbled onto podcasting, and I was like, this is a perfect opportunity for artists to connect with their audience by creating conversations or just creating these things where they talk to their audience because people, we didn't have what we have now where you can have phones and get back behind the scenes footage. You got behind the scenes footage on a VHS if you brought the right, if you brought the right, or at the time DVDs was just coming out. If you
Yeah.
brought the right DVD, you had the commentary. So back behind the scenes footage was always a big thing because you had very rare access to it.
Hmm.
So I looked at it as a way for artists to connect. And, it's just the development process. And that's how I became a programmer because I couldn't afford to pay the guy anymore. So, or if he can't, he learns how to do things on his own. So, and then I fell in love with programming. It just became a hobby of mine where I was just trying to learn how to become better at programming. But that's how I started in it. And so the overlap, sorry, I took the long way, but the overlap is it's entertainment and it's audio. And in music is very audio based, especially like
Hmm.
recording. So like the microphone you use, the type of microphone you use, the equipment. But now it's so easy. You can use your phone, you can use a laptop. Laptops when I was growing up were so expensive. You pay $600, $700 for $400. That was considered a lot of money for a computer back then. You know, where you could get a Mac now for like 25, a really good Mac for 2,500.
Yeah.
But access to it is much easier now. Macs were considered like, ooh, rich people stuff. Like, I mean, it's still expensive, but it's so accessible to people now. So, so it's easier to do things now than it was then. And podcasting, I think the beauty of podcasting too is that you don't have to be on camera. The true essence of
Yeah.
podcasting
Yeah.
is
You can do
audio
audio
based.
only.
So you can do audio only, which means I can be in my underwear, I can be at home.
You could
I
be
don't
in
have.
bed, just chilling,
Yeah,
eating,
that's how
whatever.
some people were doing it. Like they would be sitting there just go on their phone and record. So, um, but it's entertainment, and just like people have a taste in certain things that they like in music, it's the same thing in the podcast space. So you got to understand that part.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's so cool how you said you've kind of you grew up around a time to, being part of Def Jam. You said you interned for them, so Jay-Z was
Yeah.
signing all these big names. And have you ever met any of these old figures,
Old, old.
popular? That was a Gen Z slip. That was a slip up. No.
I've got to meet I've you know I was blessed, man. I've drunk with some of these people. I've smoked with some of these people. I've hung out with some of these people.
Who's the
And
most famous person you've hung out with?
the most famous.
The most famous.
I don't know, bro. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how to tell. I don't. One, my memory's crappy, but I could tell you the one that resonated with me the most.
Sure.
My man, Big Pun. Um, Big Pun was in the Puerto Rican Day Parade, I think 96, 97, right before his album came out. He was in the Puerto Rican Day Parade. We were promoting a group called Crew with Chris Lighty. Rest in peace, Chris Lighty. But and we had our face painted, their logo and all that stuff. And I was actually in the Puerto Rican Day Parade, which was wild for me, especially being of Puerto Rican heritage as well. Um, and at the end of it, Pun, I love the sampler that got from Loud Records. So we would be on tour. I always want to play, how to be a player. I'm like, yo, and how to, and you ain't a killer. And everybody would be like, nah, we ain't listening to this no more. So being in the parade with him with the High 97 float, at the end, we wound up just hanging out with him and his wife. And it was like we were out there for like 2 hours. Because I remember we were just talking. My boy, he was a producer, he was trying to get on his project. But we were just talking to him and we was just hanging out, chilling, and he was mad cool. And then a year later, I met him at the tunnel when he did Off the Books this year shoot. Sorry guys. I'm ashamed of myself because they're from Queens too. Oh, Beat Nuts. When that was big, that song was big, and they did the tunnel, and he just happened to be hanging out in the tunnel on the side, and I'm walking by, and he was like, "Yo, what's up?" And I'm like, "You remember me?" And he was like, "Yeah, from the parade." Da 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 da. And I was like, that was the part that was like, a year later. That was the first time you see me, the last time you saw me, and you still remember me a year later, despite the stardom and everything that you went through. And you stopped me when I'm walking by because we were working at an event for Def Jam.
Hmm.
Something we were doing something with it. We were promoting, and I had my Def Jam stuff on, and he stopped me and he was like, "Yo, what's up?" Da da da. Da. And when I said, "You remember me?" He was like, "Yeah." He's like, "How you been?" Da da da. And he was like, "Good to see you. You're out here still doing your thing." And I was like, "Yo, really appreciate it." So like when he died, man, I mean, first of all, I just loved him because he was just dope to me. But then when he died, I really shed a tear because I was like, man, that was my guy. Like I think that was one of the most memorable parts of my experience there. But I met a lot of the only two rappers that were really popular I didn't get a chance to meet because they passed away um was was Biggie and Tupac. But I got to meet a lot of people in the space and being on tour, hanging out with Redman. I had Cristal with the Roots when we was on tour, in Atlanta. Like I had these little experiences at a 17, 18, 19-year-old. Yeah, I was drinking. But I look like a grown ass man back then. So like 19, 20-year-old, 18, 19, 20-year-old in these spaces. And it was like, wow, like, like, man, this was great. But I learned a lot from that experience too about the business side and the entertainment side. And I kind of bring a lot of that to what I'm doing now.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. What an experience. I mean, as a 18-year-old, 19-year-old, around these big names,
Yeah.
that's something I would never forget.
Your idols, the people like, I've been listening to some of them since I was like 15, 14 years old. And I'm sitting here in the same room with them.
Yeah.
And just to go sidebar, and it's still something at 47 years old, I still struggle with in this space because some of these people, I'm sitting in the room with some of these people who, when I got into this podcasting space, I won't say I idolized them, but I studied them. I was watching their videos. If
Mm.
you had, I would have their phone numbers, or I'd be sitting down talking with them, or they would become friends, and or when they finally meet me, they're like, I've been trying to meet you. And I'm sitting here like, me, you're a Hall of Famer, or me, like you're OG in this space. Like, why would you want to meet me? You know what I'm saying? Like, I just got started. I don't even know what I'm doing half the time. Like, it's still a thing that's like I'm still trying to come to grips with. But I spoke with somebody recently. She was like, "You're famous," and I'm like, "What? No, I'm not. Like, I'm just out here just trying to grind and trying to find my footing in this space." But it's still something like it's still like that awe. And I don't get like celebrity struck, but it's still like, wow, I'm here.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people need to understand that sometimes you just need to recognize that you're here, despite all the struggles that you're doing. You're here,
Yeah.
right? You've made it this far. I tell people all the time when they tell me how many, oh, you got 25 episodes, or you did, yo, I'm going to commend you because you're here. You've made it past this. You're not a statistic anymore. When I turned 30 years old, I celebrated because I was like, I'm not a statistic anymore. Because the lifestyle I was living with me, some of my friends were living, we should have been statistics. Never went to jail, didn't get shot, never, I didn't go. I was very blessed and very lucky, So, sometimes you just got to embrace the fact that you're here in this moment. It doesn't matter who this
Mhm.
person is or what, but you did something something you can justify being in the room.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's such a humbling thing to do too, Corey, to like ground yourself and just say, wow, like look where I've come, whether someone believes in God, I believe in God, but I always say, thank you, God, for getting me to this point. I'm still in my 20s, but still that's a blessing. People
Yeah.
who didn't see 20, who didn't see 21, 22. Yeah, that's
Um, I always tell people there's 7 billion people on the earth, right?
mm,
More people have died than have lived on this planet. So if you made it this far, you made it past with a lot of people. Some people don't even make it past the birthing portion.
yeah.
The birthing portion coming into the world. So you gotta think about that, and that always keeps me in perspective. Like, yo, you're here, you belong here.
Mhm.
You made it this far.
Absolutely. Gives
You
you that
survived.
sense of urgency to use the time you have right now. So
Yeah.
that's what
So
we're doing right now. This collab. Man, I'm loving it. I'm loving it so far, Corey. But we're coming to the end. Before I get to that last question, that deep end point where I ask people the advice question. One more thing that I want to touch on is community and networking. Because with podcasting, with music, with all the stuff that encompasses you, Corey, comes both. So, what would you say is the key to building strong podcasting networks? This is something for me as well. And how can creators today, amidst a world full of, where you got bots online, you got haters online, trolls, how can we build real connections and build that network today in 2025?
well, first, if you have haters and trolls and bots, you must be doing something right. So don't get mad over that. I like and maybe it's my old school New York bravado, arrogance. I don't know. But if I got a hater, that means I'm doing something right.
Mm,
You don't have haters, and I'm not talking about self-proclaimed like, oh, the the paranoid version of haters. I'm talking about if you have a real hater, somebody
the real
really
one, yeah.
like,
Yeah.
when you have a real hater, like, it means you're doing something right. Because you're rubbing somebody the wrong way. There's something that they don't like about what you're doing, and that means they taking notice of you. That's how I look at it. Not everybody looks at it the same, but there's also that 1990 side of me too that'll be like, well, if you got a problem, what's up? Like, you know. But I think to answer your question, people need to understand, and this is a trigger word for me in this content creator, because people like throwing community and networks out there
Hmm.
freely, and people, I'm a very literal person, and I've learned about my neurodivergent side. I'm a very literal person, so I go look up definitions. The true word of community is not what a lot of people are building, or they're disguising their money. They're disguising their monetization model under the guise of community. Community is about a group of people coming together to move towards one common goal, right?
Hmm.
Now, some people might be like, well, that's not, but at the end of the day, everybody plays a role in that community. I think the biggest thing for people need to, especially in podcasting, it's a community driven industry. It is community driven. It's a very small industry in comparison to some of our counterparts. So a lot of people know each other.
Hmm.
They've collaborated. The names get dropped. Like when people say they've heard of me, I'm like, how? Like who? I'm like get a little. I get a paranoid. I'm like, how? What you hear of me? Like it was. Hopefully, it was good things,
Yeah.
right? Your name gets spoken, and people know who you are, and you go to these conferences, and you meet people along the way, and you realize how much people know about you. I think the key is, and for one of the things that my strategic approach when I talk with people about podcasting is, you have to build a community around your content, what you're doing. But that community was, how are you engaging them? What value are you giving them is outside of them just paying you. I always try to over deliver with my community. I always try to how like I'm always giving more to the community than I'm taking from it.
Hmm.
Right. And you see me. I'm like, hey, what do you guys want? What do you need? What do you like? Do you need what kind of? What are you struggling with? Let me know. I'll bring it to you, or we'll figure it out, or I'll try to bring somebody in that to help with that.
Hmm.
Um, Community is important because we're human beings, and human beings are social communal animals. Period. It's not debatable. It's not. That's how we are. That's our ancestry. It's evolution. Whatever.
Yeah.
The biggest thing you can do is be transparent, be yourself, be authentic. And I think I see a lot of people struggle with that. You know, I struggle with it because in the role that I am, I've been told that I can't always be Corey. And I get it. That's why I say there's politics with it, because if I was being Corey right now, I'd be talking like real reckless right now. But you know, but there's a side of me, one of the jokes is, no, Corey's New York City aggressive. Well, how do they know that? Because they've seen me in certain situations where they're like, yo, like, take a chill pill. But I'm like, nah, yo, like, I don't stand y'all, But I think the important part is community and networks. So I do believe your network is your net worth. What I've learned, what I've seen in from a lot of people it's a very selfish driven action to build a community and network. Now, I believe everybody, we're all trying to survive, we're all trying to eat. There is a selfish component to it, period, because that's just the nature of survival in this world, right? But when you're networking, and when I network, I'm trying to find out as much about the person and what they need, and how, if there's a way I can support them, if there's a way I can do it. I love like The Godfather. I like that. I come from like that street stuff sometimes. I have like that mentality. And it's like, okay, what do you need? Okay, if I can't provide it, I know somebody who can, right? So if somebody's saying I need somebody to do production, I need an editor, and I got 6 editors in my community. Guess what I'm doing? Here's the 6 people I recommend to you,
Yep.
and if I could put food on that person's table, I did my job. And that's where the network. That's the part of networking people forget is, how are you bringing value and benefiting the people in your network?
Mm.
Because you know what happens? That's how your name gets into those rooms. That's how you get into these places. That's how when you're not in those places, the people are like, where's Corey at? Why isn't he here? I thought he would have been here. And then the conversation goes, you need to make sure he's here next time.
Hmm.
Right. Networking is about not only what you can get from your network, but what you can provide your network. Community is the same way. That's why those really strong, thriving communities from different groups of cultures, everybody plays a role.
Hmm.
Right. They're competing, but they're not competing, right? You're going to have 3 different hatters, or 3 different shoemakers, or 3 different blacksmiths, or I'm just throwing this out there, but you're going to
Hmm.
have people who provide one, because just the scope of the need of the people, you can't do all the work. So you need to have other people to take on that work. And yes, there will be a friendly competition amongst yourselves,
Yep.
but everybody plays a role, and it's the same thing in the community. Same thing in the community. So I think as a content creator or podcaster, you need to think about your community on not just what I can take from these people, what how they can support me monetarily, but what can I give them in return to feel like they're part of the process. So I talk to people about like, yo, you'd be surprised. Like when I was a manager, when I would run teams, they would say, the biggest thing they would always say about management is that a simple thank you goes a long way. Making people feel like they're included in the process goes a
Yeah.
long way. Something I learned with music in the music industry. We see it all the time. I was listening to this artist before he became popular, right? People like to be a part of the ground floor. They like to be in that. They like to be a part of that organic growth before a person crosses over or blows up and all that stuff. So it's important for you when you're building your podcast and you're building your community. You build your community along with it, and you make them feel a part of the process. They should be a part of the process because they're giving you the most important thing they can give you, their
Hmm.
time.
Yes.
So if I have 100, like you can make a lot of money off of 100 listeners. You don't need a million downloads to make money. You don't need like one of the most beautiful things. I was checking a message before here. Somebody was like, "Yo, Corey, I was in this community. You're gonna might see an influx of people joining because I was in there promoting." That's the one. That's the other thing about running this community I did not expect was that the members love it so much that they promote it without me even asking,
Hmm.
because it's so important to them, and it's such a part of their life, and it's like that's why I say it's a true community, because they're like, you should be here. We want you here, and they're
Hmm.
actively saying, "Come join us. We want you here." But you can't do that if you're just trying to just take from them all the time.
Yeah.
So the most important thing about networking, for me, and what I've learned in my experience in this industry is, I just randomly hit up people like, "Yo, like, hey, I just, you know what? How's the family doing? And I'm genuine about it. It's not me just starting to, oh, how's the family doing? Hey, can you do me a favor? It's like, yo, I was just thinking about you. How's the family doing? What you got going on? Is there anything I can support? If you got anything you want me to throw in a newsletter, let me know. If you got anything you want me to share with the community, just let me know. I tell people all the time, you don't even got to ask me, just send it to me
Mm.
because it benefits, because what you're doing is going to benefit my community,
Yeah.
but it's also me helping support you. And people remember that. I learned that, I learned that from watching the first 30 minutes of The Godfather.
Yeah.
What does he do on this day of my daughter's wedding? I got to do favors for people. And what do you always say? I may ask a favor of you. I may never call upon you, but when I do, make sure you answer that call. If I do you this favor, and yes, that's transactional in that capacity, but it explains to you how humans, how we think and operate.
Hmm.
So it's give and take. And if you want to build a community, you got to give. You got to replace what you're taking. And
Wow.
and then you don't even know what the value is to the person. So that's why you have to understand your audience. You got to know who you're talking to.
Yeah.
Data, right? Running feedback loops, talking to people. Hey, can you get on a call with me? I got some questions. What do you need? Where are you struggling? What's your pain point? You make it about them, and you be genuine and authentic about it. Like you should genuinely care about your community. Because that's crazy if you got these people, they're giving you their time and their money and their hard-earned money and stuff, and you acting like they owe you something. One of the biggest pet peeves I used to have in podcasting, well, it's my podcast. And I'm like, well, bro, then you should just go talk to yourself, look in the mirror in the bathroom and just talk to yourself. Because without an audience, is it a pot? You don't, if you don't have an audience, there's nobody listening. So why, like, you got to at least respect. Yeah, it's your podcast, but it's not about you. And
Yes.
I think this is the same thing about community. Like I'm a visionary. I have my boundaries that I set, but I also have to be willing to adapt and adjust to the needs of the community, whether I agree with it or not, or all the time or not. As long as it stays within what I'm trying to achieve, we're good.
Hmm.
And sometimes you do have to be like, no, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
You know, find somewhere. If you don't like it, go somewhere else, right? But here, this is what we're about. So I think the biggest thing is authenticity, being transparent, communication, and respecting the people who support you and giving them a voice and giving them a space to feel a part of the process.
Wow. People remember how you made them feel. They may forget what you said, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. And even in my life, Corey, that is a true testament because people have come back. I remember I was at a pizza place, Mod Pizza. I don't know if they have it over there in New York in the East Coast.
I don't
Um,
think, but
it's a great pizza joint. But I had an old friend from college, and I think I was trying to make it a habit of just going up to people, whoever are having lunch by themselves, say, "Hey, can I sit with you?" Just try to see if I can make a new friend or whatever. We don't do that too much here in the Pacific Northwest, so. But he remembered me, and I completely forgot who he was, to be honest, because we didn't get any contact. But he remembered me, and he was like, "Hey, man, we had a great conversation." And it's nice to see you. Nice to see that you graduated, and it made me feel good knowing that this man took some time out of his day to remember me, just because we had a really great interaction a few years ago.
you
Um,
don't never know. You never know the impact you have on somebody. You don't know what they're going through. Like even my community, like a lot of times I'm the one. It was amazing. Like I get text messages like Corey, go to bed from the people in the community. I used to get those because I would like they'd be like, Corey, I go to bed at night. You're on here. I wake up in the morning. You're on here. Like when do you sleep? And it's like I have members that are genuinely concerned about my lifestyle, and and they'll check up on me and they'll call. And like even like last year, when I was going through a lot of stuff, some of those people stepped up and was just like, yo, we know something's going on with you. I've had interventions done on me, like for my community members. So, it's you know, it's more than just me putting out videos and putting out content and saying, "Hey, you're welcome to my community." Like there has now, I'm not going to say and say you can do this, right? It's not easy. I tell people all the time, you have access to me right now because we're a small community. But if we get to where I'm trying to get us to, I'm not going to be easily accessible. And it's not that it's not going to be my fault. It's just mathematically impossible. We have 5,000 members. It's mathematically impossible for me to remember everybody. But my goal is to try to see how much of an impact I can make on the people who I do have access to.
mhm.
And people, that's something I remembered in the music industry to this day. There's some people who were assholes to, just in general to people. I'm still fans of them, but as a person, no. Now we'll get into something. But back then I was just like I was kind of like young and I didn't know no better, but I didn't like the interaction because they
Mhm.
just looked at me like a regular, but there's some people who had impact that I remember me years late, like I was saying it with the pun story. So it's like, you remember these things and they have an impact on you. And so I try to do the golden rule, like, treat others how you want to be treated. But I think when networking and community, it's not always a lot of people in this space are so, and I know we're going over time, but I want people to understand too. It's not that people are always selfish and greedy. It's just they're in a space. So when I need to make money because this thing is bleeding money and I want to make this work and I'm trying to get out of my job or I'm trying, whatever their personal motivation is for what they're doing to try to make money in this space. It's not always a bad thing of why they're asking or trying, they're going hard about the money.
Mhm.
So you got to remember that too, that portion too. So, but it comes across in a lot of ways too, right? That's where the grifting and it seems scammy or sketchy, or you get these
Mhm.
drama stories of how all they wanted was the money
Yeah.
because you made the people that were giving you the money feel a certain way, and then you started acting brand new or changed up on them, or you started revealing your true colors or your true motivations. So you got to be self conscious of these things as well when you're embarking on these paths, because
Absolutely.
how you made somebody feel can damage you. You do it to the wrong person.
It
Sometimes you
can
don't know
go
who
either
you're
way.
talking to.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't know who you're sitting next to and what power they have. So
Yeah.
you got to be real careful. So, but if you're being authentic and you're carrying yourself in a positive manner and you're genuinely being caring about the people who are supporting you, you don't have to ever worry about that.
Certainly. Treat people with respect and dignity. That's the name of the game we're trying to say. Well, Corey, we are here at the end. We are at the deep end of the podcast. Amidst everything you've said, you've already given us some great advice. But to the young podcasters out there like myself, um, what are three pieces of advice you'd give us as part of the younger generation, um, on how to grow? Three lessons that you've learned in your career and your life so far up to this point, that can help benefit us and take us to the next level.
You and these questions, bro. All right. So the first thing I'm going to always say is you need to know your audience and who you're talking to. Right? You need to understand the psychographics, the demographics, create an avatar, do something where you say, here's my ideal listener, here's what they look like, here's their motivation, here's their background, create a character, create a story behind it. Here's how I'm going to help this person with my content. So some people will be like, well, I'm doing sports, I'm doing gossip. You can still help those people. You can still provide something that satisfies that need of why they need to listen to you. So you need to really understand your audience. And if you guys, the younger generation, you grew up with this technology. Like I look at my kids, and I encourage older people to bring you guys into their teams because you have a different perspective on how to use it. I did a whole report in school on native versus immigrant, digital natives versus immigrant native, all that stuff. So I understand it a little bit better than other people, but you know how to use these tools better than some of us old heads because you let me know I'm old a couple times.
Stop it. No, no, Corey.
But like but long story short, know your audience, right? At the end of the day, that will always apply no matter how young or old you are. You need to know who you're talking to. So when an old head is coming, you trying to give you advice about your audience and identify, listen to them. They know what they're talking about in that space. I think the other piece of advice as a young content creator, you need to understand that despite you might have these new approaches that you want to do and these new tools, storytelling in humans is thousands of years old, and it hasn't changed much on how storytelling resonates with us, right? So don't fight against learning how to tell good stories. Learn how to tell good stories, and then figure out how to bring your approach or bring your perspective or bring your unique taste to it.
Mhm.
Because if you do that, that's what's going to resonate with the audience that you're trying to create, right? Or trying to find. The other thing is, I will say is, you know, me being an old head now, being an unk, um, you know, I grew up in, especially like with music, I'll use music, hip hop. Like I'm not a big fan of all this new music. I'm very judgmental. People like Kendrick, Drake, me. I'm like, bro, all these guys are only popular because there's a gap. There was a huge gap created in hip hop when it started to die out towards the mid 2000s. right?
Mm.
We can go, and that's a whole nother podcast episode.
Yeah,
But
part
you know
two.
what? But that's your generation. Just like my generation was Redman and all these guys, and my, the older generation didn't was really resonating with them. Oh yeah, I don't like this music, right? I'm realizing you have this is you have your time now, right? This is your time and your space. Be comfortable with that, but don't disrespect the older heads and don't not listen to the advice, because we've made a lot of mistakes and we've also paved this path for you to be able to do it in the way you're able to do it.
Mm.
But be you, right? Understand who you are, be confident, and don't be discouraged. You're gonna fail. This is gonna fail.
Mm.
It's going to. It's not going. You're gonna think I made the dopest piece of dope content, and you're gonna have zero views, zero likes. Mr.
Mm.
B says it takes at least 100 episodes before your YouTube even starts to take off.
Yeah.
100 videos. So take that youthful enthusiasm that you have, that I love and wish that I had some of these tools when I was your age. Because I'd be, man, my rap career would have been crazy by now, right? Um, take that youthful enthusiasm and don't let the world discourage you and knock you down. I mean, stop you. It'll knock you down, but pick yourself back up. I was about to do the Rocky speech, but you know,
Motivational. We would have loved it.
but don't let this discourage you. Be willing to pivot,
Mm-hmm.
because you don't know everything, and I don't know everything. You
Mm.
have to be willing to pivot. And if the data in the market is telling you that this is not working for you, don't take it personal. Be
Yeah.
willing to pivot and adjust when you need to adjust. And if you do that and you stay persistent and consistent, you will succeed at what you're trying to do.
Mm. Mm-mm-mm. Golden nuggets right there. Corey, I appreciate your time, sir. Thank you so much.
Oh man, thank you for having me on here. I
Absolutely, absolutely.
appreciate
Before
it.
we close out, where can people find you? Where can people get connected with a Black Podcast Association? Anything that you want to throw out there?
So you can find me on socials, the Black Podcast Association. We have different handles because different platforms have different requirements. Black Podcast Association is a long name. But if you do a search on your platform, you'll find us. You can join the Black Podcast Association at blackpodcastassociation.com or Google search us. We also do events. A lot of us are here in New York, but we're trying to do in other cities. So if you're interested in connecting and collaborating with us, let us know. Um, we're also looking for, if you have a business and you're interested in connecting with Black podcasters and their audiences, reach out to me. We have award-winning podcasters. We have people in the industry. It's not just podcasters. We have professionals and executives and people who have names in this industry. So there's an opportunity for collaboration there as well with other podcasters, and getting into their market reach. But you can just Google me. I'm mainly on Instagram. I'm not a big so I'm kind of moving my way from social media, and the task is being taken away from me by the team,
Yeah.
because it's a lot of bandwidth. It takes a lot of time to concentrate on that, and my energy needs to be other place. But you can follow us, Black Podcast Association, on all major platforms. But the website is blackpodcastassociation.com. We'd love to have you as members. If you want to learn how to make a podcast, if you're struggling with your podcast, if you're an OG, this is the community for you.
Mm. Corey, thank you again, sir. I appreciate you, and I hope
Thank you.
everyone out here took some value from this podcast. I certainly did.
And
So
I'm accessible. Like, you can always reach out to. Oh, I'm starting to get into threads because I need my Twitter replacement. But reach out to me if you have a question. If I can't help you, I'll point you in the right direction. Oh, and Corey Gumbs on LinkedIn is where you can find me as well.
there we go. There we go. You guys heard him. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode, listening to this episode, whatever platform, whatever time zone you're in. I appreciate your time. Stay tuned as season 5 of the Black Experience rolls on. And until next time, y'all. Peace. What is up, y'all? Thank you so much for tuning in to that episode. Make sure to click the subscribe, follow button, as well as the bell to get notified on all my new content that is coming out every Wednesday and every other day. And make sure to click that link in the description down below to get access to all my socials and any other platforms that I have my podcast on. And until next time, y'all, peace.